yell.
Okay.
I'm hard of hearing.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for coming today, and thanks for showing up for us. And I would like to start with some questions about you. So, would you please say your full name?
Full name is Rudolph William Vrska.
All right. And what year were you born and where?
January 11th, 1926, New York City.
Okay. Please state your ethnicity or race.
Parents were Hungarian.
All right. And a description and location of your service in the war?
Starting with World War II, I was stationed at #1 at Keesler Field. From there we went to Madison, Wisconsin for radio operator and radio mechanics school. From there we went to Chanute Field for electronics school. From there we went to Boca Raton in Florida for radar school. And from there we went to George Field for overseas training. They decided to open up another training base, so from there I went to Blytheville, Arkansas, where I met a beautiful red-headed young lady, married her, and never went back to New York City. And from there he went to Kearney, Nebraska for B-29 training. War was over in Europe just about, so they decided not to send us.
Sounds like you did a lot of training.
So went back into Troop Carrier Command, stationed at Lawrenceville, Illinois. From there we went to Fort Benning, and from there I was discharged. And I stayed in the reserve. I was a staff sergeant. I thought, well, if anything happens, at least I'll keep my rating.
So was that the highest ranking that you received? Was staff sergeant?
Oh, I got a beautiful notice from Uncle Sam on about the 1st of September saying you will report for active duty October 1, Keesler Field.
And what branch of service were you in?
Air Force.
And what battles did you serve in?
No battles. Well, the battles of tech schools. And, well, the second tour of duty was a little different. I did fly all the time. I mean, every time an airplane left the ground, there was a radio operator in it, and a lot of our duties were to fly over to Fort Campbell or Fort Bragg and drop paratroopers. I was lucky I escaped all of those. I was just flying, taking little overnight flights all over the country.
And did you receive any achievements or honors while enlisted?
No. I did keep my rating. Okay,
so now we're going to start with our names. The interviewer is me, Colton Turner. The camera woman is Sophia Rivera-Braza. And the place that we are interviewing is Incarnation Church, and it is March 6th, 2018. All right. So let's go ahead with some more questions.
Okay.
About yourself. So who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My parents were Andrew and Hermione Vrska. They were immigrants when they came over. They came over in like the early 1900s.
What did they do for work?
My mom kept house,
and
my dad did whatever he could do.
Did you have any siblings?
2 brothers, older brothers.
May I ask their names?
Yeah, the oldest one was Charles, and the middle one was Edward.
Did they also serve?
Oh, yes.
Were they also Air Force? Or
No,
another branch?
my oldest brother Charlie enlisted in the RCAF. He was subsequently discharged and he came back. He was drafted. He went overseas as a sergeant. He went into intelligence. He spoke fluent German, and he went into intelligence. He got his commission, and he went into counterintelligence after that. My other brother was in the Navy.
What were you doing before you entered the service? What were you doing before you entered the service?
School.
High school?
Started college.
Mm-hmm.
I was a brain. I was going to become a doctor.
Really?
Yeah. Back then, all we had to do was 2 years pre-med, 2 years of med school, and that was it.
Really?
You went into service and did your internship in service. But my friends would come back and they were all wearing wings and they had these fancy uniforms, and I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. The good Lord knew differently.
Yeah.
I wasn't the type they wanted to fly.
Yeah. So what happened when you departed for training camp, and what were your early days of training like?
Well, of course, the earliest training was boot camp. And there you drilled and you marched and you drilled and you marched and you went on overnight hikes and dumb things like that.
Right.
They wanted you to be conversant with wartime.
Do you remember any of your instructors? Drill sergeants?
No, well, the drill instructor you remember always, because he was the first authority you really ever got to know.
How was he like?
Huh?
What was he like?
Gruff.
Yeah.
Yeah. You called him sir. Not like the Marines. It wasn't as bad as the Marines.
So did you receive any specialized training?
Yes.
Because
I was radio operator mechanic school, electronics school, radar school. Then I taught in overseas training unit.
So what did your job entail? What did you do?
When I wasn't in school?
Yeah, as you were in the Air Force.
Okay, I was a radio operator.
So what does that mean?
Aeroplane left, my turn to fly. I flew as a radio operator.
Okay. Was military life different than your life before?
Military was different than normal life, yes. But actually during Korea, it was different than it was in World War II.
How so?
It was a little easier, a little more laid back. Maybe it was because of my rank. I don't know, but it was more laid back. Overseas, my Korean duty was like about five and a half months, something like that. We were based in Japan. We were not based in Korea. We flew into Korea practically every day. Every now and then, I flew in 2 drop missions where we would drop to forward troops. We would drop food, ammunition, stuff like that.
How long did you serve in the military?
2.5 years during the war and a year in Korea.
You served abroad, as you said. Do you have any specific memories or things that happened in Japan?
Well, my first memory of Japan is you'll never know it unless you really experience it. And I don't believe it's that way today. There was a peculiar odor in Japan that there was nowhere else.
Really?
that I had been, let me put it that way.
So,
And that to me was very, very, very peculiar.
was it bad? Or?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. What are some other experiences in Japan that you had? Not necessarily in the country, but maybe at your camp, or with.
Well, we actually, my squadron was stationed outside of Nagoya, which is a fairly large city. We had we call it the top 3 grade mess downtown in one of the large buildings. When we went to dinner or lunch, we wore Class A uniforms. We had tablecloths. We had silverware, napkins.
Mm-hmm.
Cost us 15 cents. And we could order off a menu.
Really?
And that was, yes, sir, that was something. Now, during the war, there was none of that. But during Korea.
Mm-hmm. What kinds of friendships did you make during the war?
They're really friendships, but yet when you leave, when you kind of...
Mm-hmm.
I started looking them up, and there was one fellow that I was stationed with here outside of Smyrna during Korea that I remembered, and I did find him, and I corresponded with him for a while, but then even that kind of breaks down.
Mm-hmm. What about the weather in Japan? Was it cold?
The weather in Japan was nice. See, I was there in the spring and summer,
Mm-hmm.
so it was nice. I was telling the girls earlier, I'd been in Alaska for 3 months. I got there December 30th of 1950, December 31st of 1950, and stayed until late February of 51. It's cold,
Yeah.
very cold.
So
When we left, it was 40, 45, 50 below zero. We spent the night in Edmonton. We left there the next morning. It was 45 below. 4 hours later, we were in Great Falls, Montana. It was 10 degrees above. 5 hours later, we were in Nashville. It was 78. So we went from minus 45 to 78 degrees.
how did you deal with the weather? Like, what kind of clothes did y'all wear?
Hey, weather's weather, you know. And when you're 24 years old, you don't worry about weather. Do you worry about weather?
No.
No.
In the Korean War was the first integrated war, so I was wondering, how was it for African Americans, and did you serve with any necessarily?
Yeah. We had went out during Korea. There were a couple of them in the barracks here in Nashville. It was unusual, let me put it that way. But there were never any problems.
Mm-hmm. How did you stay in touch with family and friends while you were serving in Japan? Letters?
Yeah.
What about while you were off duty? What did you and the other troops do? Just
In Korea, I mean in Japan, there was... You went out and you drank beer, and I am not a beer drinker, let me put it that way.
yeah.
I was buying whiskey from the enlisted men. See, during Korea, if you were in the top 2 grades, enlisted grades, you had your own club. During the war, they had the enlisted men's club, which was when you were corporal on up. And in Japan, unless you were in top 3 grades, you couldn't buy any whiskey. You had to get a top 3 grader to go in and buy you a bottle of whiskey and bring it out to you. Class society.
So while you were serving, what did you miss, like, about your home?
I miss my wife and my kids because I was already married and had 2 children. Of course, my youngest one was handicapped. He was retarded, and I didn't know it. My wife didn't tell me. She said, "You had enough worries over there," so she didn't want to tell me when I got home.
How old were they?
Skip was about 8 months old when I got home, or 9. And my oldest daughter she was about 4 or 5.
So where were you when the war ended?
I was at home.
You left before it ended?
Oh, well, World War II, I was at home when Japan surrendered.
Yeah. What about the Korean?
Not at home. I was at my wife's home. We got married 2 months later.
Okay.
The Korean War, it hadn't ended when I got out.
Yeah.
The Panmunjom wasn't there yet because they were still fighting when I left.
How did you get home? Did they take you by boat?
I came home by ship. They told me I could fly home. Since I was aircrew, I could fly home, but transportation officer in Japan said, "I can get you to Hawaii, but from there on, you're on your own." He said, "You're liable to spend a month." He said, "But if you get on this ship, you'll be in San Francisco in 2 weeks." So I said,
Yeah. So how was it like when you got back home? How were you received by your friends and family?
hopefully they were glad to see me. I guess they didn't throw me out of the house. I bought a television set.
Really?
The day I got home and watched, who was it, for the Giants hit the home run, that the Giants beat the Dodgers. The guy had just walked out the door and was sitting there watching him, and he hit the home run. So that was my highlight of my homecoming.
So was it different, like civilian life compared to?
Oh yeah.
Well, how did you readjust to it?
Hey, it's just something that's automatic. You don't adjust. You just pick up where you left off.
Right. Now, what did you do for work after the war?
Went to work for the power company. Mm-hmm. And then I went to work in defense. I worked for Raytheon. And since I had an electronic background, that's what I did.
Yeah. Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
I used to, but not anymore.
Mm-hmm. We might have touched on this earlier, but I was wondering if you've remained in any kind of contact with fellow veterans that you served with, maybe?
No, like I say, the one, and we kind of just drifted off.
Mm-hmm. What have you done since separating from the military, other than like your job?
That's about it. My work was, after I left Raytheon, I kicked around and I went to work for RCA here in Memphis. Mm-hmm. And then I went to work for American Electric in Memphis as a regional sales manager. And I traveled for 17 years.
So you weren't always here in Memphis?
We lived here in Memphis, yes.
When you got back from the war, is this like...
No, well, we lived in Blytheville, Arkansas for about 13 years. And then when I went to work for Raytheon, they were in Bristol, Tennessee. And I lived in the Virginia side of Bristol. Then we moved back here. For a while, we were back with my wife's parents. Then RCA came, went with them. Then we came to Memphis. That was in 1966. And then I went to work for American Electric in 1968.
And I would like to touch on maybe some reflections. How did your wartime experiences affect your life and affect like how you acted?
I don't think they did, because I never had any real traumatic experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just day-to-day living. I was young. I was your age, girls, you know.
So, did like boot camp maybe change you any at all?
No.
Screaming at you, just
I mean, life is there. You live it, you know,
yeah.
day to day.
So, what are some life lessons that you learned?
Wow, I'm not going to tell you all that. Oh, patience, and I still have a lot to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Put me behind the wheel of my car and I'm a terror. Don't do anything wrong in front of me, because your ears will burn.
I was wondering, is there anything that you would like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
Gee, I wish you'd asked me that yesterday so I could think about it. Tolerance, I guess, would be the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to ask me that, do you?
No, I don't know what she's saying. I want to know, how has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
You know, I wouldn't give $1 million for my experiences, but yet I wouldn't want to go through it again.
Right.
And once is enough.
Right.
Once is enough.
When you said the message you would like to leave, you said tolerance. What do you mean, like tolerance?
Tolerance of one another, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I tolerate your bad habits,
Yeah.
but I want you to tolerate mine also.
Right. Right. Is there anything that you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview? Or anything that you want to say about your experiences? Maybe just tell stories, anything?
No.
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, I'd have probably given you a sermon here, but I'm more tolerant now.
Yeah. Do y'all have any questions you want to ask?
No, very good.
Okay.
They're girls, we're boys. We have our own
Yeah. All right.
shtick, as they used to say in New York.
All right. Well, I guess that concludes our interview. Unless y'all are sure y'all don't have any more questions.
Thank you.
I wish I could have lived a more colorful life, you know, and had some real big war stories to give you. But
No, I think it's good.
unfortunately, mine was all calm, cool, and collected.